Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's September 30th, 2022 program. Initiative 114, Does Oregon Need More Gun Control Laws? This is the fourth program of our 2022-2023 programming year, and my name is Karin Knutson. I am City Club's president. Welcome to everyone here having lunch with us today in downtown Eugene, and to our live stream and listening audiences. It is wonderful to see you all and to have you with us. Support for the City Club is provided by our members and by both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, the University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College, and we also receive generous support from the City of Eugene. You too can help to support City Club's weekly programs and our mission to build community vision through open inquiry by becoming a member at our website, cityclubofueugene.org. We invite everyone, members and non-members alike, to participate in our programs, both in person at our 2022 venue, the First United Methodist Church at 1376 Olive in downtown Eugene, or on our YouTube page. Near the end of today's program, and after we hear from today's speakers, there'll be a question and answer period, and you're invited to ask questions in person at the microphone or via the YouTube live chat. Election Day 2022 is now just under 6 weeks away, and City Club is midway through our fall programming on statewide ballot initiatives and candidate forums. We appreciate all of the feedback that we have received on our program year thus far. When your mission is to support conversation in community, it's truly delighting to know that people are highly engaged and asking questions and sending emails, sometimes lots of emails. Last week's forum on the proposal to change Lane County's name to Kalapuya County prompted a lot of comments, feedback, ideas, enthusiasm, questions, and a significant amount of local media attention, some of which inaccurately credited the City Club as the originator of the idea. I'd like to thank everyone again who participated, and also to David Lewis, Douglas Card, and Rick Pettigrew for participating in that discussion. To deliver our mission to build community vision through open inquiry, the City Club coordinates conversations and invites speakers who can help us to learn about important, topical, and sometimes divisive community issues. This is a fascinating process to participate in every week. Thank you again to our program committee for all of the work that they do. But it also can be complex and delicate as we work to simultaneously create a forum for debate and discussion while also maintaining standards for engagement and behavior. Today's program required some extra work and restructuring to accomplish that goal, and we are proud of the results and appreciate the opportunity to hear today from speakers who are both supporting and oppose Measure 114. With that, I would like to thank John Belcher for his work to coordinate this conversation, and I'll now invite him to the podium to introduce today's program, our speakers, and our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. Initiative 114 is garnering a lot of crossfire, which is no surprise considering it proposes to regulate firearms and their use. It was a major topic of discussion at the gubernatorial candidate just this Tuesday in Bend. One was for it and two were against. The topic may have been particularly heated because there had been less than about 5 weeks ago in Bend, this was a scene of a shooting in a supermarket where a gunman expended more than 100 rounds of ammunition, killing 2 shoppers and then himself. AP reports that Portland has had more than 800 shootings as of the beginning of September this year, and it's also been reported the U.S. has had more than 1 mass shooting a day thus far in 2022. This is the background for Oregonians, and we consider in November whether to pass Initiative 114, a ballot measure that would, A, require a permit issued by local law enforcement to buy a firearm, B, require photo ID, fingerprint, safety training, criminal background checks, and fee payment to apply for that permit, and C, ban high-capacity magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds. Oregon already has laws requiring guns to be locked and or securely stored when at home. Permits are required for concealed carry, but open carry is allowed. Background checks are required when purchasing a gun from any source, including private firearms sales and transfers. Convicted felons, youth under 18, and people with mental illness cannot purchase a firearm. This measure is opposed by organizations such as the National Rifle Association and supported by groups such as the League of Women Voters of Oregon. Will passing Measure 114 make Oregon a safer place, or will it deny people their constitutional rights to bear arms, or will it do both? We will hear from two speakers who will help us answer those questions today, one in support and one opposition. First, Reverend Mark Knudsen is the chief petitioner for Measure 14, and we're fortunate to have him for that purpose. He's the Augustana Lutheran Church pastor in Portland. He has served on many boards and committees on the issues of social justice, including immigration reform, police reform, LGBTQIA plus issues, and the anti-war movement, and has received numerous awards for his activism. In 2012, he was named one of the 50 most influential Portlanders by Portland Magazine. Although his son graduated from USC, Mark is a U of O graduate and an avid Duck fan. Mark will be followed by Paul Hoffner, who wrote 6 of the 7 of those arguments in opposition in the state voters pamphlet. He is a member of the executive community of the Oregon Hunters Association and their legislative committee chair. In his previous time, he was the director of the Oregon State Marine Board, the state's boating agency, for over 25 years, and his work led the U.S. Coast Guard to award him with their Meritorious Public Service Award. He is a lifetime member of the Oregon Hunters Association and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and a longtime sponsor for Ducks Unlimited. So he loves ducks too. Our moderator today will be Chris Lehman, reporter from KLCC. Gentlemen, welcome to City Club, and we will begin with Reverend Knudsen.
The City Club President, Karen Knudsen, John Belcher for organizing this, to my colleagues Miles Pendleton, Jim Jagger, Tom Peck, Karen, to Reverend Dan Bryant and Reverend Adam Brittle of this wonderful Methodist church. We are so glad to be here at the City Club. Never underestimate, we say, what can come out of the basement of a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, any house of worship, because that is often where change comes from, for the common good and for the sake of others. Let me just say by introduction that I am a graduate of the University of Oregon in I won't say the year, but when I was a 16-year-old, I ran the state championship in the 2-mile. I took 9th in Corvallis that day. This guy by the name of Steve Prefontaine took 1st. I followed him to the University of Oregon 2 years later and got to know him well. But I learned from him and Bill Bowerman, the coach, about setting your sights on a goal, training every day, working with teammates to make it happen. And that's what Lift Every Voice Oregon is all about. It's about making change happen for safer schools and safer communities. It's making change happen to change the day we're living in, where people across this nation are throwing their arms up saying, what can we do? Enough is enough. And yet there's a beacon of hope here in Oregon with Measure 114 for safer schools and safer communities. Now, I'm a pastor, so I have to give some grounding. In my tradition, Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And all the great traditions that are part of this coalition, and people of just goodwill who never step into a house of worship, but who are about this for the sake of our children and youth, we know we're centered in love. And so to my colleague right here next to me, I'm so glad to have met the representative, Paul Don Hoffner from the Oregon Hunters Association. This is going to be the most high-road campaign Oregon has seen in years. We're going to respect one another, because love means you respect each other, but you can debate and you can work together. And you know what? That's what democracy is all about. This has been a Democracy 101 lesson for a lot of our high school and junior high students who got to go out and get signatures, seeing they can make it work when action is not being taken. Tomorrow's the first day of hunting in Oregon. And as the many hunters who are part of Lift Every Voice Oregon who will be out there tomorrow know, they only carry 5 cartridges in their gun. We have a lot of veterans in this coalition. And they'll tell you they went through extensive training. And in defending this nation, they could only carry 20-round magazines. And yet, in Oregon today, anybody over 18 can buy large capacity magazines, 30, 40, 50. Look at Ben just a few weeks ago. Something's wrong in Oregon today. There's something wrong when schools, stores, and places of worship, our communities from Bandon to Bend, Pendleton to Portland, Eugene to Elmira, Springfield to Seaside are not safe from the scourge of gun violence. There's something wrong when people across the United States of America are crying out in grief and mourning from Buffalo to Uvalde and so many places in between, and yet no action is being taken. There's something wrong when the start of the school year for almost 3 decades in this church begins with, from pre-K through high school, doing lockdown drills and active shooter drills. There's something wrong when the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health and social health of our children and youth is being assaulted, and adults are doing nothing. My friends, the gun violence pandemic in America and in Oregon is a public health crisis. And as a spiritual leader, I want to say very clearly, this is a spiritual crisis. For we're disconnecting the sacredness of life with what is taking place in this nation today. If we cannot do common sense laws that keep the Second Amendment in place for those who hunt or need a gun for protection or whatever reason, if we cannot pass common sense laws to protect our children and future generations so they can begin the school year learning their math and their reading, their music, and playground time without fear, we are not acting responsibly. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose 6 principles of nonviolent direct action have been at the core of Lift Every Voice Oregon and now the movement, the coalition for Measure 114, once said, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now." The fierce urgency of now. In Bend, Salem, and Portland, in one weekend, 7 people died from gun violence and many others were wounded. One weekend. We are confronted by the fierce urgency of now when 55,000 people in this country will die from gun violence, over 500 in Oregon. You know, that's more than any war except World War II in 1 year. We're in the fierce urgency of now when one of the many children who was working on our campaign the other night, an 11-year-old writing postcards asking people to join this campaign, she wrote these words. "My name is Naomi and I'm 11 years old. Gun violence has caused fear and anxiety for my classmates and myself when we go to school. Please vote for ballot measure 114 for me and for my classmates to go to school safely." Dr. King said these words, "There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because conscience tells you it is right." We are in such a time. To all those out there in the virtual world listening today, we know you are sitting there making your minds up, and we are here to say, join this movement. Join us now in this time. That is why in this Kairos movement, when history breaks in upon us for an opportunity to do something that can not only change Oregon for the better, but change this nation, we need to seize this moment together. That is why 5 years ago, Lift Every Voice Oregon began a cross-section, the most diverse coalition Oregon has seen for years. 2,000 volunteers almost, getting 161,545 signatures to put it on the ballot. Impossible, many said, but people of everyday people in Oregon said, no, we can do this. The youngest volunteer was 12 years old, the oldest was 94. He may not make it to the election, but he knows it's going to win. He worked every day to make sure that happened. That is why children are now out there getting people to vote. We had parents walking into the offices carrying babies in one hand and 300 signatures in the other. It was inspiring to see. So what is this going to do? Common sense laws that will protect our children and youth, make our communities safe and our schools safer. We can no longer wait to reduce gun violence in Oregon. This is the Kairos moment. This is the urgency of now, right here, for our children's safety, for our school safety, for our community safety. Measure 114, as so many of you know, because you do your, I always honor, I know there are people out there listening, you've done your research. You know what 114 is about. So let's recap it for a moment. requires a permit to purchase a firearm. That makes all the sense in the world. Of the states around this nation that have that, it's reduced gun violence by 30%. Makes a huge difference. Background checks, closing the Charleston loophole. Even if that hurricane approaches Charleston today, we think of the people of Florida and the East Coast and the Caribbean. The Charleston loophole was Mother Emanuel Church, AME. That young man who took that gun in and killed 9 people, plus Reverend Clemente Pickney at that Bible study, never would have had that gun if that full background check had been completed. Fingerprinting for verification purpose. Many in Oregon, gun owners and non-gun owners, want this in place. Safety training to ensure responsible use. The hunters are working on this campaign, and many friends I know who hunt, they don't want to be in the woods tomorrow with people who've never learned how to use a gun properly. Our veterans know you have to be trained if you're going to have a gun, and to pass that training. Limiting the sale of military-style high-capacity magazines. One of our Army veterans talked about what these magazines will do to human flesh. It's like cutting through tissue paper in the human body. The states who have enforced this kind of new regulation does not impact hunters or anybody else. It has saved lives. You're 5 times more likely to have more deaths with large capacity magazines than without. And in every instance where there's been a mass shooting, when that shooter had to reload, that's often when somebody could jump up and make a difference. If you have 50 rounds, that's a lot of people being shot. How am I doing for time? 4 more minutes? 2 more minutes? I know my colleague here is a better preacher than me, and he'll have more good facts. But these are common sense regulations that are going to save lives, and that's what is at issue right now. Saving human lives, not going on with the status quo as what is. This measure has so many supporters from so many different places. From all, I can just name the groups that are part of this, from all walks of life, and it is building daily more and more. And we need this time to happen now. We cannot go on with the status quo in Oregon. And let me say clearly, this is becoming an inspiration around the nation. People are asking about the Oregon model because nothing is happening in other states. And we know we can do this. So I encourage all those who own guns, and many gun owners support this, a high number. You know, BIPOC leaders support a lot of these higher than most of us. And there's 75% support across the board for background checks being completed. There are statistics. These are statistically driven remedies to help curb gun violence. And so as we get ready to go out today later on, I encourage you to join this campaign. Those of you who are at home, it's time to get involved. It's time, I know you're going to get involved. You probably already are. When I'm talking to young people, I chair the Northwest Health Foundation board. The first chair was the great Senator Mark Hatfield, the Republican, 10 years before me when I chaired it. But we talked about the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual and social health being part of the definition of health. When I talk to a high school senior, I say, how's your new building? They say, it's beautiful, but we don't have bulletproof windows. When I talk to another high school student, and I say, what are you looking forward to this year? And they say, I want to get good grades, I want to get in a good college, and I don't want to get shot. When I talked to my niece, who's at the University of Oregon, as a high schooler, she got engaged in this, and she told the OPB reporter about lockdowns in 7th grade, and the reporter said, was that your first one? She goes, oh no. When I was 5 years old, they called us on the rainbow carpet. Our teacher, I can remember locking the doors, pulling the blinds, and surrounding us for 2 hours. Oregonians, are we going to let that continue? This is about our children and youth, our safe schools, our safe communities. This is effective, it's proven around the country, it's constitutional. Every aspect that's been written into this has hold muster around the country. So let me close by saying, you know, I said earlier that this will save lives. And I said, I had the privilege of running track at Oregon with Steve Prefontaine. And I remember after the 72 Olympics, he came back from Munich and he was discouraged. He was down. He had come in 4th when he should have got the gold medal. He'd been there for that horrific shooting of the Israeli athletes. Every athlete in that village was changed from that moment in time because of that violence. And he said one night, we were all together, he said, Mark, I'm going to retire at 23 years old. He didn't do that. He ended up going to the mountains, the hills of Colorado with Frank Shorter and trained that fall and early winter. And I'll never forget the cover of Sports Illustrated when it came out with Steve on the cover. And it said, search your soul, then run like the blazes. Oregon, we've been searching our soul. We know what we need to do. We need to run like the blazes. Oh, everybody who's out there who hasn't taken a stand yet, time to get off and get on the track with us. We need you. We need your support, your finances, your energy, your time. Get out there, search your soul, and let's run like the blazes. The nation is watching, and if we can pull this over the finish line and make Oregon schools and communities safer, the rest of the nation's taking note. And they're going to be ready to run with us, and we can transform what is in this nation to something new. So let us not become weary. Let us keep the hope. Let us keep the love at the core, and let us run the race set before us. We can do this, Oregon. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to the Eugene City Club and KLCC for hosting this forum on Measure 114. It's vitally important for citizens to learn about the true impacts of this proposed law. I've studied this measure closely, and it is not what it appears to be. So let's examine 114 in depth and look at some of the unintended consequences. The Oregon Hunters Association, with 26 chapters statewide and 10,000 members, urges all Oregonians to vote no on this dangerous and misleading measure. We're law-abiding citizens who hunt and own firearms for what we do, including sport shooting and self-defense. While I respect the proponents of this measure, I believe their intentions are good, but like so many ballot measures and initiative petitions, there are always unintended consequences and problems that result from proposed laws that are not properly vetted, reviewed by the legislature, and a public process. Let's start with the name of this proposed law, the Reduction in Gun Violence Act. To the uninformed, that sounds like a great idea. Who is opposed to reducing gun violence? Certainly OHA does not condone or support gun violence. Nobody wants gun violence. But will 114 actually reduce gun violence? That's the question. It has two major impacts to Oregon law. It's really two measures disguised as one. First, a ban on commonly used magazines, and second, a new permit to purchase scheme. Ballot measures are only supposed to have one subject within them, and I don't know when magazines and a permit system became the same one subject, but they're both in there. So if you vote to limit magazines, you're also voting for a permit system, and that's a little bit of false packaging. Now, gangs and criminals cause the majority of the daily gun violence in places like Portland. 114 doesn't keep bad guys from getting guns or take them off the streets. It doesn't provide more needed law enforcement or hold criminals accountable, nor does it provide more mental health programs. Sadly, 82% of gun deaths are suicide. Only 14% were homicides, and that's from Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence. Measure 114 doesn't address mental health. There are more drug deaths at 18.7 per 100,000 than gun deaths, which are 13 per 100,000 in Oregon in 2021. That's per the CDC. Will another law to limit gun ownership solve these problems? The first major hurdle for 114 is it violates the Oregon Constitution and the U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment, which is no small problem. We firmly believe that 114, if passed, will eventually be deemed unconstitutional. The magazine capacity limit has already been ruled against by the Ninth Circuit Court of the U.S. Court of Appeals, which includes the Oregon area. But there's more. The permit to purchase won't be in place till 2024 at the earliest, according to the Oregon State Police and our analysis, leaving a big question of whether gun sales will be immediately curtailed upon passage of this measure if it takes effect in early December. Why should Oregonians be voting for something with a big cloud hanging over it, and why do we need to spend the time, money, and effort to go to the courts to preserve our rights? If in doubt on ballot measures, I always vote no. 114 doesn't necessarily reduce gun violence. The criminals and gangs that are shooting in the streets, they don't bother to get background checks or purchase legal firearms. None of them. If you're a criminal, you don't go into Cabela's to try to buy a firearm. It doesn't happen. 114 tramples our right to own firearms. It's a complicated, expensive, and impossible to comply with process for obtaining this permit to purchase, which reveals the real goal of 114, which is to either slow down or eliminate all gun sales in Oregon. We already have mandatory background checks. You can't purchase or transfer a firearm without one. There are over 2 million of these done in the last 5 years alone. And this new permit background check is really a background check to go to the store to get another background check. So isn't one background check enough? Do we need 2 background checks? 114 also allows cities, counties, and police departments to potentially prevent all firearm sales. If they don't provide the funding for the staffing or the mandatory courses, the live fire training, and the other things with this, there will be 0 gun transfers. There is nothing in 114 that compels city police chiefs hired and fired by politicians to issue permits, period. No permit, no firearm sale. It's not far-fetched to think that, see this happening in some of our more liberal cities. Some of the other impacts. It'll make thousands of Oregonians into instant criminals for owning common and legally obtained firearms and magazines. It'll put gun dealers out of business, but it'll be great for the out-of-state gun dealers because that's where everyone's going to have to travel to purchase firearms. Measure 114 adds new roadblocks to an already cumbersome purchase process. It's a redundant background check that includes mandatory gun safety classes and live fire tests, which will come with hidden fees not covered by the application fee. The required gun safety classes and live fire training don't exist. Live fire training is required by this measure, and it will be extremely problematic to find. Most gun ranges are privately owned, and many are members only. They aren't located in every community. This will be a major impediment for persons seeking to obtain one of these permits. It's just not going to happen. You go out to smaller communities around the state where there's no gun ranges, what are these people supposed to do to comply? I know that many people believe the current background check system is flawed because technically a gun dealer can sell a firearm if no check is completed by the Oregon State Police within 3 days. But in reality, no gun dealer that I know of completes a transfer until they get the green light from OSP. It often takes weeks. I waited 2 weeks for Cabela's to get a green light from OSP before I could pick something up, and that's very commonplace. The liability of them turning over a firearm without a completed background check is too much. 114 will not prevent crime or mass shootings because criminals will never comply with the law. Only law-abiding gun owners are restricted. And it won't prevent mass shootings necessarily because murderers or terrorists can use a dozen 10-round magazines to create the same destruction as 4 30-round magazines. But think about it. Why would they comply with magazine limits anyway? If the punishment for murder isn't enough of a deterrent, why will a magazine capacity stop evildoers? They're not going to go into a mass shooting and say, oh, gee, maybe I'm going to get caught for having a magazine that exceeds this measure. So let's look at a few other unintended consequences. 114 has an unintended consequence. It hurts funding for wildlife conservation. Since 1937, the Pittman-Robertson Federal Wildlife Act allows sportsmen to put an 11% excise tax on firearm purchases. It funds wildlife conservation. When we buy firearms, those taxes come back to Oregon supporting wildlife projects. In 2020, ODFW received $14.3 million from this source, which went to wildlife conservation. Hunters also support wildlife funding through groups like the Oregon Hunters Association, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, who raffle and auction firearms during our banquets for wildlife habitat and conservation efforts. Without a permit in hand, 114 will end this nonprofit fundraising and wildlife conservation will lose again. Further, we anticipate that if it passes, Oregonians are going to be forced to travel to Washington, Idaho, Nevada, heaven forbid, California, to purchase a firearm since the permit to purchase will be unavailable or too much hassle and expense. When they buy out of state, those excise taxes go to the state in which they buy it, so it doesn't come back to Oregon. And again, conservation funding suffers. Let's look at another of the consequences with this. It creates a state-run database of all gun owners with no right of privacy or protection, revealing all your personal information. All the this includes the victims of domestic violence will have their data public forever. It's a permanent database. Who honestly believes that a state database of gun owners can't or won't be used for the wrong reasons? The recent public release of all gun owner information in California proves that we have good reason to be fearful of this data can be hacked, stolen, or used against its own citizens by the government or by criminals. Let's talk about the large capacity magazines. This is one of the major impacts of it. It's one that seems to get most of the media attention. It really is a ban on any magazine capable of holding more than 10 rounds. Many of the most common handguns today have a capacity over 10. If you've ever heard about the Glock 17, the 17 stands for the capacity. It's a 17-round magazine on it. That's from the factory. These are common self-defense pistols with standard factory issue magazines. Suddenly, all of these people are going to be criminalized under this measure. 114 does have an exemption for magazines owned prior to passage, but it will be impossible to prove you owned a larger magazine prior to passage without receipts, making law-abiding gun owners instant criminals. There are no date stamps or born before labels on magazines. Someone with evil in their heart and mind is not going to worry about the consequences of possessing a large capacity magazine when they're committing mass murder. We can't eliminate magazines. Citizens aren't going to surrender them. Bad people will find them illegally or resort to other means, and law-abiding citizens become the criminals. It makes no sense. And as I mentioned before, that magazine ban has already been ruled unconstitutional in the Ninth Circuit. So let's talk a little bit about the good part, the funding, money. This measure imposes a massive new cost on the state and local governments, but it fails to provide adequate funding. It's no wonder the Oregon State Sheriff's Association and law enforcement officials oppose 114. It's unfunded and drains their limited resources. Oregon ranks, sadly, 49th in officers per 100,000 nationwide, and this does nothing to improve that. In fact, it makes it worse. Law enforcement is already woefully underfunded and understaffed. It can barely respond to anything but the most violent crimes. How do we expect them to gear up to do all these new classes, live fire training, background checks, et cetera? The official fiscal statement for 114 reveals it will require at least 31 new Oregon State police positions. The sheriffs are going to require at least 275 positions. None of these are budgeted. For 2023-25, the state cost is over $15 million. Local governments will require over $98 million, a combined cost of over $114 million. The $65 fee for the permits generates $19.5 million a year, leaving a shortfall of over $75 million, which falls hardest on city police and sheriffs. The additional costs of classes and live fire training are another hidden tax on permit applicants. So it's really bad from a fiscal standpoint. Unfortunately, the proponents of this measure didn't provide the funding to carry it out, and it falls on general taxpayers to pick up the tab. So let's wrap up and summarize. Ballot initiatives like 114, written with good intentions, seldom work as promised. We don't need or want the unintended consequences. It doesn't do what it says it does. It doesn't keep gangs and criminals from getting guns. It doesn't add actual law enforcement officers. It doesn't fund mental health, and it doesn't hold violent criminals accountable. It will cost state and local governments over $114 million a biennium, and it will reduce important funding for wildlife conservation. Law enforcement statewide is strongly opposed to 114. The Oregon State Sheriff's Association and various other law enforcement officials oppose this burdensome, ill-conceived, unconstitutional, and unfunded measure. The money drained from state and local government is better spent on more enforcement officers, school resource officers, mental health, and the prosecution of gangs and criminals using illegal weapons. Defunding the police has been a disaster. So please join OHA and law enforcement officials statewide in opposing 114. We don't deserve the unintended consequences this measure will bring. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Mark, for your opening statements. We're now going to move into a time of questions. I will start with an initial question, and then we'll take a short break here so members of the audience here can write up some questions and submit them. We're also getting questions already through the live chat on the YouTube stream, and some questions via email as well. So I would encourage you to start thinking about those. We're going to try to move through as many questions as possible, so I'll ask our panelists to keep your responses brief. We don't have a specific time limit on responses, but we'd like to hear as many questions as we can. So as an opening question, and again, we'll try to get to many more as we go on, but as an opening question, I will ask this. The right to bear arms is enshrined in the United States Constitution. Courts have found over the years that, like the right to free speech, there can be some sideboards created around the right to own and use guns. Some of those include restricting ownership and usage based on age or criminal history. Measure 114, however, would require adults with no criminal records to apply for permission to exercise their Second Amendment rights. So I'll ask this question to Paul first. This permission-based model, is that something that you think would create a precedent for potentially extending that to other constitutional rights, that you'd have to ask for permission from the government to exercise a constitutional right? And feel free to use the microphone in your hands there. And I'll ask that to Paul, or I'm sorry, I said Paul, I got your names mixed up already. I'll ask that to Mark first, and then Paul can respond as well.
So the permit to purchase is an objective process. It's not subjective, which means it's going to be fair and equitable. And in several other states in this country, that is in place. And it works very well, and it's proven to reduce gun violence. So it is constitutionally upheld across the country where it's been tested, and it's proven to be, does not impede on one's Second Amendment rights by any means. It just helps to make things safer. I heard very little about our children and our youth in the other comments a moment ago. And there's quite a list. So I'm going to encourage everybody, go to the voters pamphlet. There are many good statements that will clarify a lot of the things you heard just a few minutes ago. Again, I honor my colleagues' words, but I want you to be able to check the facts and check this out too.
Well, I think the biggest problem from our perspective is that it's a redundant process. I mean, having to get a permit in order to go shopping for a firearm, and then you have to pass a second background check. It really makes no sense to have to go through 2 background checks. But moreover, the steps of obtaining this so-called permit to purchase really create a number of roadblocks for everyday law-abiding citizens to go through. These classes are not readily available. Live fire training, as I said earlier, it's going to be very problematic to find that. It's just not something that you can go down to the corner and find a place to prove that you know how to fire a firearm. And moreover, what kind of live, it doesn't specify what kind of live fire training you have. So if I want to buy a shotgun to go waterfowl hunting, do I have to demonstrate proficiency with a handgun in order to do that? Or if I want to buy a handgun, do I have to show proficiency with a shotgun? It's a barrier to really slow down and impede people.
Thank you both for that response, and we'll move now into about a 5-minute break for folks in the audience to submit questions. And again, if you're watching this on the YouTube live stream, you can submit your questions in the chat that way as well. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back, and thank you for taking some time to think about some questions. And I do want to clarify for those in our live audience here at the City Club of Eugene that there is a microphone up at the front for you, and we'll open it up for a little bit. But I wanted to start with a question. We got a couple of versions of this through our email and live chat. And I'm going to start this time with directing the question to Paul. And the question is, since you are not supporting Measure 114, what ways and recommendations do you and your organization that you recommend have to reduce gun violence in Oregon?
Well, part of it, as I alluded to in my remarks, more funding for law enforcement. The defunding of the police, they're so short-staffed today, they can't really solve crimes. They barely can run from one to the next. So additional law enforcement is a key. Holding people that use guns illegally, holding them accountable. There have to be consequences for that. Right now, there are very few consequences. I think most criminals are emboldened. They know nothing's going to happen. More school resource officers, many of those were removed from schools back in 2020, and they should come back. And then there's a need for more mental health, access to mental health and behavioral health programs.
Mark, I take it since you support Measure 114, that question again was directed to Paul. I'll invite folks, if you want to ask a question who are here in the audience, just come on up. That will reduce the time that we have to wait for you to walk forward. So I will ask this question now to Mark. Measure 114 would require prospective gun owners to demonstrate their, quote, ability to lock, load, unload, fire, and store a firearm, which we heard that described a little bit earlier. It doesn't specify how good they have to be at any of those things, only that they have to demonstrate their abilities. It also says the state police may adopt rules regarding these firearm safety courses. What sort of standards do you expect the state police to create when it comes to the demonstration of these firearm skills?
Well, let me just say, if you read the article in the Oregonian a few weeks ago about the concealed permit law, hundreds of thousands of Oregonians have gotten concealed weapon permits and had to go through a very similar process to do this. And so this is not something new. It's building what is already out there. We also have an equity committee that's going to look at this law to make it the best put together. Miles Pendleton here from the NAACP is a co-chair. And to make it fair for those purchasing guns across the board, especially looking at BIPOC communities who often have been discriminated against, as we know in this nation. And so we're looking at the implementation to be, I would really encourage the Oregon Hunters Association, who they do trainings, to join the process with us for the implementation, because it'll be the state legislature and the Oregon State Police who will put together the standards and the testing. Our equity team is going to walk with them to make sure this is really fair and effective. But again, read the article about concealed weapons permits and the process there. And nobody around the state has had a problem getting that permit when they wanted to. So there's some arguments being put out there. If you look at facts and history in this state, this will be moved into it in a way that really works. And let me just say this too. When I was young, they had put a seatbelt law in place. I had parents and uncles who would drive us in pickup trucks. We loved riding in the back of those, but they adapted for the sake of the kids to put in seatbelts and to make us safe. And that is what this is about. And a lot of money had to be spent, but to ask me how much it costs for one human life. What's the price of a human life or a community that's been impacted by gun violence?
And Paul, I understand you're not advocating for this, but I wanted you to have the chance to address your thoughts as far as standards that the state police might have when it comes to demonstration of firearm skills.
Well, I have no idea what their state police is going to come up with, and I think that's what, those are some of the unknowns that make you pause with this thing. But we do have concealed handgun permits today. Unfortunately, this measure doesn't grandfather them into giving them a permit to purchase. So even if you've gone through all the vetting and testing and the rest of it to get a concealed handgun permit, you don't get a permit to purchase automatically. nor do you get a permit to purchase if you've had extensive training in the military. Veterans don't get a pass on getting these permits to purchase, nor do retired law enforcement. So they have to go through the same rigmarole as everyone else.
Thank you. This question I will address to Paul first. Paul, in an argument you submitted to the voters' pamphlet in opposition to Measure 114, you stated, quote, Measure 114 will not prevent violent crime or mass shootings because criminals will never comply with the law. Using that logic, one could argue that perhaps there shouldn't be any laws of any kinds on the books since criminals simply wouldn't comply with them. Why shouldn't our society create laws that are designed to foster safe communities?
Well, I think we already have laws that foster safety. I mean, you do have to get a background check today to legally purchase a firearm. And most law-abiding citizens are fine with that. They go down and they get a fingerprint, you fill out an application, it gets run through the system, and you get a green light or you get denied, but people are comfortable with that. This new redundant process is just a big roadblock to keep people from participating in that. And you know, you talk about disadvantaged communities and so forth. They're already mistrustful of the police, and I think the last thing they want to do is go down and try to get a permit to purchase from their local chief or the sheriff. They're not exactly friendly going down to see the police right now.
I would say this, polls show nationally that in BIPOC communities, African American communities, Latino and others, a high degree of yes for permits across this country, higher than in white communities. And so that's an important thing to remember. People want to see this take place. And let me say about the permit process and the test process, again, we invite other organizations to come to the table to make this a really good process in Oregon and effective. And you have to invest when you go through a change for public health and the well-being of communities and schools. But in this process, too, you know, if you're going to own a gun, you should know what it can do. When my son got his driver's license, he had to take classes, and they had to watch a video of what happens when you're driving a car without seat belts. And they had a trauma nurse there to talk them through it afterwards. If you're going to own a gun, you need to know what it's going to do. And in many of these shootings, they're spur-of-the-moment purchases, and somebody carries out something who never should have had that gun to begin with. And if you know what a gun can do, you're not about to use it quickly on somebody else or yourself. And so I think it makes common sense. It's not going to keep people from having guns who want to hunt and do other things that are safe in the community, but it will certainly make a difference and impact for our communities and our schools for the better.
We have a question now from a member of our audience here at the City Club. Please go ahead.
Jim Jagger, a City Club member, and I have a question relating to the risk to law enforcement, okay? And I want to hone on the words of accountability, and Mr. Hoffner, you've talked about redundancy, and so it's kind of a question specific to you two. What is the redundancy between the words request and completed? Because that's a material part of Measure 114 as I've read it and understand it. The law enforcement, I was in the district attorney's office for almost 5 years. The law enforcement solves crimes every day, and they should be applauded for the work that they do and really awarded for all the diligence and things that they do. But here's the question, do you accept that as the law currently exists in Oregon, that there is a risk to law enforcement? Because while the persons, apparently you know, I understand, do not deliver a weapon or firearm until it's completed, many others do not, and that results in law enforcement, once a completed background check occurs, they find that these persons who, for a prior crime, a felony or risk or danger, whatever, then law enforcement has to go out and retrieve these firearms from persons who had never had it in the first place. So to address, is it fair and accountable for us to leave then that hole in the current law, or should we correct that by saying you only deliver it when it's completed? Because that's what Measure 114, which protects our law enforcement, and that's why I'm standing here. Law enforcement needs protected. Don't you agree?
I support law enforcement 100%. Now, let me understand. You're referring to the belief that gun dealers deliver firearms without having a completed background check. Is that correct?
It's not my belief. In fact, it occurs across the nation, including Oregon. The fact is that firearms get delivered to purchasers or persons acquiring them.
Yeah.
And then subsequent to that, the background check is completed and shows they never should have it in the first place.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that's 80%, 20%,
Yeah.
5%. If that puts my neighbor who's
Yeah.
a law enforcement
Okay.
person going out to pick up this firearm, that's one too many. This provides accountability, and I guess my question to you, don't you think it's reasonable that we not just simply rely on the persons you know, but we make everybody accountable who's a seller, that they can't deliver a firearm until it is completed? Wouldn't you think that is reasonable?
I think that's reasonable. I don't think that most firearm dealers that I've ever been associated with will not give you a firearm until they get the green light from the OSP. Now,
And I
now
agree with
there
you.
may
You bet.
be some, but
Yeah.
you go across the Cabela's and try to buy a firearm, until you get the background check completed, you're not walking out of the store. It doesn't matter 3 days or 2 weeks, you can stand there and plead all you want, you're not gonna get it.
And I accept that. I think that.
And
oh,
we just
sorry,
have time for a couple more questions, so I want to make sure other folks get a chance. Mark, did you have a response to that, or can we move to the?
We move to the next
Okay,
one, that's fine.
all right, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sandra Bishop, City Club member. I want to put this to a larger context. This is a ballot measure that is coming from the people, and I have no argument against the sentiment behind it. But where is the funding going to come from? What does this look like in the big picture? This looks to a lot of people like one huge unfunded mandate from the state. So how is it going to, if it does pass, how is it going to be implemented and paid for? And wouldn't it be better if it were deliberated at the legislature so that there could be the funding coming with it? Thanks.
That's an excellent question, and I really appreciate that. The problem is the legislature has not been able to deal with these issues. They did the safe storage law, which was wonderful last year, but other issues have not been addressed. There's a figure in the Oregonian the other day, almost $900 billion a year gun violence is costing our communities. $900 billion, and it's in the hundreds of millions in Oregon. And that's not taking everything into account. I know a lot of police officers, when they have a gun violence, how many have to show up on site with command modules, the emergency rooms who receive those, the hospitals, the mental health costs to our children in Oregon, who's taking that in? So when you start to factor all the repercussions of gun violence to our communities, the cost is astronomical. The fees for this will help pay for it, and there'll be other ways to implement it. But it would be affordable for the right reasons. And again, you cannot put a price on a human life, and you cannot put a price on our children. Every child in Uvalde has been impacted terribly by that shooting, as you know. And we think about how do you deal for years and years of post-traumatic stress in children, the costs engaged. So the investment now as a state will be a wise investment, and again, it's going to help the nation start to wake up and have hope again.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. It's not funded, and it's going to be up to local governments, in many cases, counties and city police departments to find the funding for it. And so that's money that could be better spent, in our opinion, on more patrol officers or more mental health officers or school resource officers, rather than people that are going to be running more redundant background checks and classes and things like that.
Our next question, please go ahead.
This is for Mark. I'm opposed to the measure you've put forth, but besides that, I feel that 114 is really penalizing legal gun owners. And what is the percentage of these mass shootings which are not an illegal gun and in a gang-related shooting? I guess the second part is, how do we avoid a Measure 110 issue where right now we got buyer's remorse because we're trying to do a good thing by decriminalizing drugs and get people into rehabilitation, and there's no money for it, or they don't want to go to rehabilitation. So how do we avoid that with Measure 114?
The fact is, what is happening in our communities and our schools is overwhelming in many cases. And even the permit to purchase, the training that would be engaged, I think most gun owners I know, they take training courses. And many of the guns purchased for mass shootings were purchased legally, but if they would have known the background of that person, they would not have gotten those guns. So that's part of it. Again, we have many gun owners and hunters and veterans working on this. Read our voters' pamphlet statements. You'll see that. The other thing I want to underscore quickly with that, too, is the cost. It's not up to the local police to be offering the training courses. Those can be offered in other ways. We live in a society where people start businesses to do things. Dick's Sporting Goods, their trainer, said he was overwhelmed with all the people coming for training for a permit to purchase a concealed weapon. So there's opportunity in this state now for others to start businesses to make sure trainings are offered and that are approved by the state police, and that will happen. That's part of implementation. And so there's a real opportunity to have well-trained gun owners who are responsible, like you, sir, who know how to use one and how to be responsible for it, and that's the goal in this. But the key is this will make our schools safer, this will make our communities safer, this will let our children be in school today not looking out the window where the nearest exit is.
Okay, we have less than 2 minutes remaining. If you'd like to come forward, I believe we have time for a short question and short answers.
Sure, thanks. My name is Tom Peck, live in Eugene. In the United States, there are 400,000 guns in the hands of civilians. There's more guns than there are people in this country. In Oregon, there are 500 people a year die of gun violence. It is the second leading cause of death of our children. My question is, I know there may be, but possibly not, a delay in purchasing guns, but is the devastation to our children and our communities and the gun violence worth a slight delay in purchasing a gun in the future?
Paul, I think that question may be directed towards you.
Well, it's more than just a slight delay, because these permits to purchase are not going to be readily available, particularly for people in small communities around the state. It's not just going to be something you can go online and take a class and be done with it. Even people that have concealed handgun permits won't get these permits to purchase. So people that are well trained are still going to have to go through the whole thing. People that have been using firearms their whole life are going to have to sit in a class and then demonstrate proficiency. It's really an insult to those people that are experienced.
Is it my question is, how about the children? Is this worth our children's safety?
I don't think there's any guarantee that this measure will prevent mass shootings or the kinds of mayhem that we see out there, because that's largely a result of people with bad mental health.
Well, statistics would show otherwise on that comment. It's worth everything we would put into this. Implementation is a big piece of this. Again, we encourage groups like the Oregon Hunters Association to join in with us, with the legislature and the state police, to make sure this is done equitably. I think if anybody in Oregon believes that gun sales are going to stop the minute this is passed because it hasn't been implemented yet, that's out there. That's not a reality that's going to happen. Because we know as the implementation process takes place, the legislature can make timelines that work so people around this state will have the opportunity to continue living as they have. I've lived in rural Oregon. I've lived in the city. This is not a rural-urban event. This is Oregonians. In every county of Oregon have gone to work on this. Again, veterans, gun owners, people of faith, people of goodwill, children, 90-year-olds, we're all in this together. And I really believe that if we do this now, we have to. What's the choice? Continue with the status quo, where 500 Oregons are going to die, 55,000 in the United States, or to take action in this moment in time. And so I believe clearly this is the moment, this is the time, and we can make this work in Oregon. We've made other things work really well when we made a step forward for the common good. And that's what this is all about. Thank you again, and my colleague, good hunting to you this weekend or whenever you head out.
Mark and Paul, thank you both very much for coming today and for sharing your viewpoints on this.
And thank you, Chris Lehman from KLCC. This has been our September 30th 2022 City Club of Eugene on Initiative 114, Does Oregon Need More Gun Control Laws? Before we thank our speakers one last time today, I would like to recognize City Club's Diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities that we serve. More information is available at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians to question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. And you can learn more at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy, and you can learn more by visiting peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, please visit lanecc.edu. And we thank the City of Eugene for its generous support. I would also like to acknowledge today's gold sponsors, Ferguson and Fife Dentistry and Hummingbird Wholesale. Thank you for your help in delivering City Club's mission. And a thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PAC Info and Simplified Computing LLC, and Dotson's Photography. A special thank you also, of course, to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC 89.7, for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. In addition to the KLCC archive, City Club programs are always available on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. In the weeks ahead, we have a sprint finish to Election Day. Next week's program at the City Club of Eugene is unique in a few ways. The City Club of Eugene is proud to be partnering with the Springfield City Club and League of Women Voters to host a candidate forum for the Congressional District 4 election. That is the seat that has been held by retiring Congressman Peter DeFazio for 36 years. All 5 Congressional District 4 candidates have now accepted the invitation to participate in this forum, and the 90-minute program will be moderated by KLCC's Chris Lehman. This program will be remote-only attendance to accommodate broad interest in a range of locations, so please visit City Club of Eugene's website to RSVP, and thank you to the Springfield City Club and to the League of Women Voters for your partnership in making this important conversation happen. Looking ahead 1 week further, in 2 weeks on October 14th, City Club will welcome you to join us for a program focused on Measure 111, Should Affordable Health Care Be a Constitutional Right in Oregon? We learned a lot today from our speakers and in this discussion, and we expect to learn a lot about that statewide ballot measure in a couple of weeks. If you think you may have a question about the Congressional District 4 race or the health care measure, please send us an email at info@cityclubofeugene.org. And we will look forward to hearing from you. You can learn more about this upcoming program, programs in the future, by visiting our website, cityclubofeugene.org. Finally, one last thank you to today's speakers, Reverend Mark Knutson, Chief Petitioner for Measure 114, and Paul Don Hefner of the Oregon Hunters Association. Thank you both for your remarks and for helping to educate us about this measure. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us for this discussion. It has been a pleasure to welcome you to the City Club of Eugene. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you in weeks ahead.